Just one more day. And she will be here. Hello. Ooh. The mountain's exploding. The question of which unit to pick from the annual standard selector used to be a very simple one until they announced level 100. So let's start off talking about that. A few hours after the release of this video, level 100 characters will be made possible, and my collection of 76 level 90 characters will be rendered invalid. But the way you get your characters to level 100 is what makes this relevant to the standard banner selector. You push characters' level cap up using a material that you get for getting copies of 5-star characters after you already have their C6. The way that a lot of people are going to get access to these materials is by losing 50/50s and getting C6 of standard 5 stars. This kind of throws a wrench in the works to my previous advice. I've mentioned in previous videos that my advice was going to be just go for the character that you like. None of these characters are significant enough that they really matter for the long-term strength of your account. None of them will significantly change your account by getting them. They're standard units. Their explicit purpose is to make you feel bad when you lose your 50/50 to them. But now that copies of standard units past C6 can make your relevant meta characters potentially stronger, if you're a person who's solely focused on meta, or even just a person who has another favorite character and would like to get that character to level 100, maybe your move is to go for a constellation on a character that you have a lot of their constellation, or maybe even all of their constellations for, so that you can build your way towards getting the level 100 materials, or even just start getting level 100 materials. And I know I just quickly mentioned meta. I guess I might as well say my piece on this, because frankly I don't really want to make a full video about this. Right now, when it comes to exactly what level 100 does, we don't know. This video is going up on the day that the patch comes out, so we will know after a few hours of you hearing this, or maybe you already know if you're watching this a day after it goes up. But me, as of now, recording, I do not know the numbers. I am not going to say how valuable level 100 is, because I don't know. We've had a lot of numbers thrown around, but until the day comes, until the patch goes out, and we get the game in our hands, none of these numbers mean anything. All that I know for sure is that it will provide some increase. Hot takes here on the Mies channel. Level 100 won't do nothing. What I mean to imply with that, say you have a C6 diluc who is level 20, you're never going to use him in your life. And then maybe you have a fully built level 90 Jean, C0, you use her all the time with, I don't know, Veresa, let's say. Getting an extra copy of diluc to get that level 100 material and taking Veresa to level 95 will be more beneficial to your account than getting Jean C1. I don't even know what Jean C1 does. Yeah, that sucks. Anyways, level 100 has made this more of a textured thing, because now standard characters and standard constellations can mean more than just kind of cool things that you can probably make use of somewhere on your account. They can mean actually making your meta relevant units numerically stronger. That being said, again, I don't know the impact of level 100. I don't have the numbers yet, and frankly, I don't think much content will be balanced around level 100. It's a relatively high investment thing, and a large majority of players aren't going to have it. And I doubt helloooo would gate any significant portion of content behind it. This means that the objective, hard meta, right thing to do is to get a constellation on a standard character that you have close to C6, so you can start building up star glitter and invest more into your stronger characters. Or whatever the level 100 materials are called. But I don't know how relevant level 95 and 100 is gonna be, and you're probably still just okay picking your favorite. By picking a character that you like over getting your more relevant meta characters to level 95, I don't think you're making some grave mistake. It's just you probably could be using your resources a little bit better, but it doesn't really matter that much. So let's talk about the units. And let's get off keqing, because I'm gonna go from worst to best here. I think this is where I'm gonna go full rage bait mode, because I think diluc is pretty uniquely awful. He's a pretty standard pyro on-fielder. He doesn't have anything special, just has some normal attacks that he can infuse through his burst, has an E that has a triple combo animation. It's kind of cool, I guess. But the numbers on this playstyle are very very, very low. Pitifully low. Like, not meeting a lot of modern DPS checks levels of low. But the one thing that people talk about that Diluc is good at is plunge, because he has a mysteriously higher plunge multiplier. See if I can find another level 6 Claymore user. I think Gaming, yeah. Gaming has a high plunge multiplier of 233. You have 271, hello? Does Gaming have a low multiplier? I think Gaming has a low multiplier. Anyways, Diluc has 325, which is still significantly higher than Chongyun's, which is most often the standard. His multiplier is a little bit higher than everybody else's. He has a bit of a higher base attack because he's a 5-star. He ascends with crit rate, and he's a pyro unit, and you always run Bennett and plunge teams, so... Fire resonance. I implied it, but I didn't say it. He does have a lot of attributes that inherently make him synergize with plunge, but he's still not the best plunger. Plunging is inherently a very, very generic archetype. You get Shanyun, you get Seat Lally, you get Bennett. Boom, magic formula. 90% of the characters in the game become competent on-field DPSs. And sure, Diluc is fine in that role, but again, he is not a standout. He's a little bit above average. There are many other characters with way better features than him. I'm always legally required to bring this up, but Fremine actually out DPS's Diluc in plunge teams. Granted, this is all spreadsheet stuff, so it's like not actually real. It's Disney World assumptions. This is never gonna play out in game unless you're very, very good. But essentially, Fremine is another Claymore character, so he gets high multiplier plunge attacks. His C3 increases normal attack levels, which actually makes his plunge multiplier higher than Diluc's at level 10. And also, there's his element. Because he's cryo, he can press E and get another instance of cryo application, which helps him get another plunge melted. So yeah, how's that for an indictment? Diluc's intended on-field playstyle is so awful that you can't even play it in most modern content, and the archetype that everyone praises him for, which may I remind you, he is strapped to a rocket-powered wheelchair in it, he gets beat out by Fremine, of all characters. Fremine. Now, this is not to say that Diluc is unusable. As I've said, he is decent in plunge. He's one of the better options, and plunge is a fine team. If you want to make Diluc work, if you want to make Diluc your on-fielder that does all your damage, it is exceptionally easy to do so. But essentially, it has nothing to do with him. He is not the DPS in the team. He is the stick that Shanyun hits people with. Frankly, Diluc probably shouldn't be here at the bottom. You can squeeze more value out of him than you can qiqi or mizuki, but putting him above those two because he's the best in plunge, even though he has the worst intended kit, it just doesn't sit well with me. So there's your piece. Diluc's intended kit is absolutely awful, and therefore a lot of his cons really aren't that great. He doesn't use his skill or his burst at all in plunge, so the levels are useless. He gets some buffs related to his skill and his attack speed, which are all useless in plunge. But C1 is a 15% damage bonus against opponents whose HP are above 50%. So, yeah, there you go. There's Diluc. What a great character. 5 of his constellations are effectively useless in his main playstyle that most people use him in. Now let's talk about the other two that I just mentioned. It's really hard to pick a loser between these two. They both have it really, really bad, and it's hard to say who has it worse. Qiqi has some fairly strong healing, along with some debuffs and a little bit of off-field application, whereas Mizuki has an actually useful element and a pretty strong weapon type, along with an occasionally useful swirl buff, and let's not forget that she actually has some pretty decent mobility options. The standard selector is a particularly strong boon for newer players, and for those players, things like mobility might be strong considerations. But yeah, unfortunately they both fall off pretty quickly. They both need decent field time to make full use of their healing, and Mizuki's healing is still not good even if given that field time. Mizuki can't trigger normal attacks with her auto attacks. Qiqi doesn't generate energy and has an extremely long cooldown. Qiqi is very technically usable as a physical on-fielder, but most of her utility is given by Farina's existence. So if you want to play Qiqi, you probably want Farina. Mizuki is a lot less Farina reliant just because her healing is not good enough for Farina. And she might see a small bit of a renaissance when it comes to Nod Cry, because already we're getting units that don't scale on damage percent, so Farina isn't all that useful for them. We have units dealing with transformative reaction damage. I've been messing around with Mizuki and Lunar Charged. So while there isn't a ton of use for her at the moment, I think that with Nod Cry, she does have the potential to grow. And there's the caveat that any growth she does, Aoife is likely to match and double. This is another situation like diluc, where like in a vacuum, Mizuki can be made better than Qiqi. There's more to work with in Mizuki's kit. You can make a better team involving Mizuki than you can involving Qiqi. But to make that team, you're probably gonna ignore Mizuki's kit and just use her as an Animo normal attacker. And there are also so many different alternatives that you can choose from. There is very, very little that Mizuki does uniquely. So can she be made better than Qiqi? Yes, but do you probably have a character on your account that is already a better version of Mizuki? Probably. And that's why I think these two belong next to each other. Talking about their constellations, I guess I'll start with Qiqi because hers are just straight bad. We have energy regeneration. It's 2 energy on an 80 cost burst? Yeah, an 80 cost burst. You can potentially trigger this a lot, but it still doesn't make up for the fact that Qiqi doesn't generate energy and has ridiculously high requirements. Gets damage bonus for normal and charge attacks. Skill and burst levels are just more healing. Attack debuff at C4, and of course your infamous C6 that revives the whole party. Do I have to tell you guys that Qiqi cons are bad? I don't think so. I think you have figured that out yourselves. I think I do have to tell you that Mizuki cons are bad though, because a lot of people are holding out hope that Mizuki cons make Mizuki good. No, Mizuki cons make Mizuki playable. I can kind of lump in C1, C3, and C6 together because all they do is increase Mizuki's personal damage as a swirl-based DPS. And they are all decent increases. They're not bad percentage-wise. What makes them bad is that Mizuki starts at such a low floor. Because she starts at a lower baseline, any increases are worth less. C2 is the big one that a lot of people talk about. Oh, she needs this to be good? No, she does not need this to be good. Again, she is a little bit more usable with this, but she's still pretty bad. I've talked about a lot her asynergistic healing with Farina in the past. This constellation does not fix that. You don't get any good fanfare generation with Farina. You're still limited to not being able to do any normal attacks. That doesn't get changed with constellations. You just get a bit of a bonus. You give damage bonus to your entire team based on Mizuki's EM. Although, hey, wait, what did I just mention when it came to Farina? A lot of Nod Cry units not scaling on damage percent. So yeah, this constellation does not fix any of the inherent issues in Mizuki's kit. It just gives you a nice little stat buff that isn't going to be used by the majority of the units for the coming year. C4, I'll actually give to you guys. This does fix her healing. Essentially, previously, her healing has a restriction. She drops these little snacks on the ground, and depending on if you're below or above 70% health, they will either explode or heal. Heal if you're below 70%, explode if you're above. C4 makes it so that they always heal and explode, which makes her healing procs a lot more consistent, which makes her swirls a lot more consistent. She gets some extra swirl damage. This actually is a pretty good con, and it makes her a decent bit more functional, but again, her baseline is so low that it's still like not fantastic. And then C5 is more healing because burst levels increase healing. Yippee, yippee. I know I was kind of just railing on them, but they are genuinely all pretty good constellations. It's just that they're on a unit that has such a low baseline. All they really do is make her usable. They make her functional. They make her worth thinking about. Which, to be fair, that is more than can be said about Qiqi. Qiqi's constellations do not make her functional. At least Mizuki's constellations make her make sense as a unit. I think I'm also going to talk about the next group in a pair. Very similar dynamic to Mizuki and Qiqi, except these two are actually kind of good, is keqing and tighnari, where they both start off at a pretty similar baseline, and they actually do a lot of similar things. But keqing has stinky garbage doo-doo cons, and tighnari has cons that actually scale pretty well. So with constellations, he becomes a bit of a stronger unit than her. Granted, with a few more restrictive teams, but whatever. Both of them are quick swap DPSs. They do their damage very quickly in large bursts and don't take up a lot of field time. And they also both focus a fair bit on the quicken reaction. Tighnari on the spread side, Keqing on the aggravate side, although she is known to diverge a little bit. Hyper Bloom, Overload. Tighnari also does a little Hyper Bloom, but whatever. I'm getting too into the weeds here. They're both defined by their potential for short field time. Tighnari has his skill, he uses it, he does 3 shots, he swaps. Keqing has her skill, she uses it, she gets an infusion for a few seconds, does some normals and charged. And then her burst, which is a bunch of multipliers on a short cooldown. Really, the main difference is that Keqing has the potential to on-field a lot longer than Tighnari, because her cooldown 7.5 seconds compared to her infusion duration is 5 seconds. You have very little downtime when you account for the time it takes to cast the skill and get the infusion in the first place. And she is also usually run on Thundering Fury, a set that decreases her cooldowns, so you can on-field her for longer amounts of time. Tighnari doesn't really have that option. His 3 shots are attached to a 12-second cooldown. That's most of what you're gonna get. And also his burst is on a 12-second cooldown. Aside from being a little more flexible in gameplay, I would say that Keqing is a little bit more flexible in team building options as an Electro unit. Electro just needs a little bit less to function. There are more archetypes that it works well in. Aforementioned Aggravate. We just got Lunar Charge. There's Overload. There's all sorts of swirl stuff. There's so much you can do with Electro units, but also on the flip side, Keqing doesn't really stand out as an Electro unit. There are so many Electro units and they tend to all be able to fill the same roles, at least the on-fielders. They have their own nuances, but they tend to be played in similar situations. And so Keqing is competent and flexible, but she's not really a standout. She's not doing anything particularly unique, and she's often outdone in her only role. You can essentially think of her as if like Diluc was actually good in his on-field playstyle. Yeah, whatever, he's fine, you can make good numbers with him. If you like him, you can make him work. But there are a million other limited pyro DPSs that can do way better than him if you want to pick one of those up. And in Keqing's case, the DPSs that are better than her aren't even limited. But yeah, Keqing can provide a strong anchor to an early account. You can use her in a lot of situations. She doesn't need a ton of investment because she can make so much happen with transformative reactions. You can kind of stack EM on her in the early game. She'll be able to carry you a decent amount. As I mentioned, the constellations, they're not great. C1 and C2 are basically nothing. And then C3 through 6 are all minor damage upgrades. Talent levels, whatever. The burst is much more important than the skill. C4 gives attack, C6 gives damage bonus. Big whoop. Let's talk about Tighnari. A little bit more limited than Keqing, but probably has better teams. He's focused around spread and pretty much always has to be run with an Electro character. So he's always doing some variation of spread, quicken, quick bloom. Lends himself very, very well to a dual carry playstyle. I've done a bit of Sethos in the past. I know a lot of people like that. I've played EI. I've played Dory. I mean, if you really want to, you could just play Keqing. You could play the two of them together. But yeah, his teams, they're a little more one note, but his DPS is a little stronger and his constellations are a fair bit stronger. C1 is 15 crit rate on the charge attacks, which is the majority of his damage. C2 is 20% free Dendro damage bonus. And you know what? These cons are starting to sound familiar. Burst levels is whatever, doesn't really matter. 120 EM. C4 is effectively a free instructors. 120 EM to the entire party. This can end up being a fairly strong constellation depending on the team. C5 is skill levels. It's absolutely terrible. And C6 actually changes Tighnari's playstyle entirely, and it makes him able to charge up his special stronger charge shots a lot faster without having to use his skill. And it makes them a fair bit stronger by adding an extra arrow to them. So C6 effectively lets you use him a little bit more like Keqing and lets you extend his field time, play him as a little bit more of a dedicated on-fielder. And with all these small damage increases from all these constellations, he actually becomes pretty good at it. C6 Tighnari is a fairly strong unit. Stronger than a good few of the limited C6 5-stars that came out before him. But yeah, somewhat limited teams, and you have to enjoy playing him, which not everybody does. Now let's get into who I believe are the 3 strongest units, with number 3 being Jean. I think at the beginning of Natline, I genuinely would have put Jean at the top. She would have been number 1 because of her strong synergy with Farina. But since then, 2 things have happened. Number 1, we just got a few more units that can fill Jean's spot, namely Shilonen, Res Shredder and Healer, but it's easier and it lasts longer. She sacrifices a little bit of healing, but she's strong enough in the rest of her kit to make up for it. And of course we have Escoffier. We got perhaps the most direct Jean upgrade of the year here. She only shreds res for 2 elements, but man, she kind of took Jean's place in most scenarios, didn't she? In any case, the second thing that has happened has been Farina has simply become a little bit less relevant, and I think she will continue to become a little bit less relevant. The strongest teams of a lot of Natlan units, like Mawika, like Varesa, like Mualani, like Kinich, none of them are running Farina. It's pretty much only Chaska and Skirk that are consistently running Farina, and they both kind of need Farina all the time. But yeah, between less units wanting Farina and more synergistic units coming out to work with Farina, Jean has just become less and less of a relevant option and has fallen more into budget status. Still very good, but she's fallen off a little bit. Oh yeah, and also Nod Cry is coming, and none of those units will scale with damage bonus, and Farina is probably not going to be used with any of these units. I almost forgot to say that.
And then I did forget to talk about her constellations. I didn't really talk about C1, but yeah, this thing really does suck. Increases the pulling speed and the damage dealt from her skill. Needless to say, you are not running her for her skill damage, especially not if you have to hold the skill for a full second to get this bonus. C2, it's kind of funny, it's not very useful. If Jean picks up any particles, you get a 15% movement and attack speed buff for 15 seconds. These are extremely situational gimmick stats. This is a constellation for silly YouTube videos, not for real teams. C3, extra healing. Who doesn't like extra healing? C4, actually kind of interesting. It can serve as a potential Animo support constellation as it shreds Animo res by 40%. At the end of the day, C6 Farzan is just gonna be significantly better. She is going to provide far more for your team while being significantly easier to play. But if you don't have Fars on C6 and you do have the chance to get Jean C4, which is an actual possibility, Jean C4 can serve as an okay replacement. Again, overall, she does less for your Animo DPSs. She shreds res, which is probably the most important thing you could do, but she doesn't give crit damage, she doesn't give damage bonus, she doesn't generate energy, she doesn't do all those useful things that Farazan can do. She just shreds res, and the enemy has to be standing within her dandelion field for their res to be shredded, which is difficult because it constantly pushes enemies out of it. That's not an issue for bosses, and thankfully a lot of endgame content is bosses, so this isn't really something you have to worry about, but you do still have to worry about circle impact in general. It also has pretty low uptime because her burst, again, I forgot, she just does not have a duration listed on her burst. What is the duration of Jean's burst? I'm gonna count it. I'm gonna count it right now and I'll remember it. Alright, it disappears at around the 10-second point, so that is around 10 seconds. So that's pretty poor uptime on that res shred. Another reason that you probably just want C6 Farazan over C4 Jean. It's not like it's easy to get C6 Farazan. C5 sucks. Again, you're not in this for skill damage, and all that skill talent levels do is do skill damage. C6, it also kind of sucks because you don't really need damage reduction. She already has enough healing. It's a neat effect, I guess. Not a particularly useful one. Okay, back to the video.
Okay, let's go number 2, who I've tossed it around in my head a lot, but I think for the order of this, I actually am going to choose Dehya as my number 2. Dehya is not a fantastic unit, and Mawika's existence erases a lot of her relevance, but like, she's a standard unit. All of them have been power crept. Them not being as good as other units is kind of the thing. Whatever, Dehya, she's just kind of a cool unit. I haven't gotten a ton of chances to talk about Dehya in general. At C0, she has a sort of interesting defensive playstyle. You get interruption resistant damage mitigation along with some pyro application in a big circle. Doesn't do very much damage, but then she starts scaling very, very well with constellations and actually gets reasonable damage. I don't know how much I have to say about Dehya, other than the fact that off-field pyro application can be useful. It has become very useful. Of course, there have been situations like Kinich and Emily. Chevreuse needs overloads to constantly be triggered. Application in general is just useful. Reactions are good in this game, guys. It's hard to talk about Dehya's strengths because really, most of it is just the fact that she doesn't have a ton of weaknesses. She feels good to play, she can deal some decent damage if you get constellations on her, and she kind of just does everything that she says she's gonna do without making a fuss. She does some pyro application, she does some defense. It just works. It just works. That's really it with Dehya. She just works. There isn't a ton that she's gonna do in a ton of meta-relevant teams, but she is a solid and comfy slot in so many of my teams for over the past year. I can't even begin to think about what I've done with Dehya all this time. Dehya is just a generically strong unit that I have enjoyed having on my account. Interruption resist and damage mitigation and application all in one slot without having to consider energy. I cannot overstate how comfy she is. I guess this is why I really can't justify putting her at number 1. But Dehya is pretty solidly my most used. She's never really gonna be the best in any given team, but I think out of all the standard units, she fits into the most teams the easiest. You can toss Dehya in anywhere and she'll just do the job.
I also forgot to talk about her cons. I didn't really forget as much as I just didn't feel the need to, because they all just increase her damage in various ways. C1 flatly increases the scaling of her stuff by a decent chunk of her HP, 3.6% on her skill and 6% on her burst, and it increases her HP, given that this constellation makes her HP scaling roughly equal to her attack scaling. That HP boost is pretty nice. C2 doesn't do so much for her damage. It does increase the coordinated attack of her skill by 50% if your character is attacked within it, but that is not reliable nor particularly strong. The main benefit is that it increases the field's length if you use the double tap version of it. Talent levels are just nice universal increases. Nothing to complain about. C4, the strong effect is that it provides flat energy to Dehya. You can get a lot of energy back from this and have to build a lot less energy on her. It makes her signature set a lot more worth going for. And the cool effect that doesn't really do much of anything, but again, it's cool. She gets a self-heal. And then C6, her burst gets a crit rate buff, and when she lands crits, it gets a crit damage buff, and its duration gets extended. And this does stack with the C4 to give you more energy and healing. So yeah, good constellations that make a character that already does a decent amount do some pretty strong DPS.
Anyways, let's talk about number 1. You guys knew it was Mona. So again, I went over this a lot in my head because I was trying to decide if Dehya or Mona were the better unit in my head. Not that it really matters, because you could probably ask me tomorrow and my answer would change again. But essentially, how I worked it out is that all standard units are kind of bad in some way. Some are worse than others, but they all have significant flaws. Like going back to Dehya, how I was talking, you just kind of throw her in her team and she works well. You don't need to think about her. And her weakness is, yeah, she doesn't require a lot, but until you get a few constellations, she also doesn't do a lot. She has some defense, she has some application. That's kinda it. She is consistently slightly above average in my book. Mona takes this in the opposite direction. She, of course, has this burst that I still don't quite remember how it works. There are a lot of complicated steps to it, but essentially it gives a damage bonus buff. A particularly strong damage bonus buff. And of course, Mona is a catalyst unit and can therefore use Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. So Mona has the potential to give very, very high buffs. And she also actually has some decent buffs in her constellations as well. C1 gives some damage bonuses to reactions. C4 gives crit rate, which is also pretty significant. The rest of them actually kind of suck, but whatever. Those two are pretty solid on their own. In any case, Mona can give out some pretty nice buffs. The issue is actually getting those buffs out. Her skill is kind of miserable. She places out this little taunt that does little ripples before eventually exploding. And it's that explosion that generates particles. So when you're summoning her skill on top of an enemy, not only do they have to stand still until the skill explodes for you to get the particles, but you've probably swapped off Mona by the time that it's exploded. So you won't be catching the particles on field. My point is that Mona has really, really bad energy needs. Her skill is very bad at getting her the energy that she needs to cast her burst and get her buffs off, especially if you're trying to use a weapon that doesn't give ER like TTDS.
I lost the plot a little bit here, but essentially, the point is that Dehya is easy to fit into most teams, but she doesn't do anything fantastically, whereas Mona does have the potential to be a very powerful unit, but it's hard to access that power.
And she's most recently reared her head in Skirk teams, which, by the limitations of only wanting Cryo and Hydra units, she has stepped out of her role as budget Farina onto the main stage, and is finally fully being embraced as the second Farina that she is. That's right, with C4, Mona becomes better than any C0 5-star support in that slot, or any C6 4-star support for that matter.
Again, like Dehya, I didn't so much as forget to talk about her constellations as much as I just chose not to. She has 2 good buffs. Her C3 technically can help her get to her maximum buff a little easier, because her maximum buff is 60. It maxes out at talent level 10. I am not going to need to use a crown to get to that maximum buff, so that's like nice, I guess. But really it's C1 and C4 that are the real buffs, and C2, C3, C5, and C6 are all focused on giving her personal damage, which is not good. It's funny, but it's not good. Okay, bye.
So, honestly, maybe that's it. This feels like it was kinda short. The edit is probably still gonna be like 40 minutes long. Whatever. Cause at the end of the day, it still doesn't really matter. What I said at the beginning of the video still absolutely rings true. None of these characters are good enough that you should really think that hard about who you're gonna pick. You should probably just go for your favorite. Unless you have one that's particularly close to C6 and you would like to get a character of yours to level 95, then you should probably go for them. But if you're unconcerned with getting your characters to level 100, if you don't have any standard 5-stars close to C6, just grab your favorite, shove them wherever you can. And again, even though I was very, very mean to these 3, they are all still fundamentally usable. There are plenty of teams where you can put them and they feel good to play. Is that it? I think that's it. That just means it's member reading time. Shout out to my beautiful, beautiful members. Those being Najodo, Rumpelitus, Pegby, Penguin, Dotiz, Dorsal, from twitch.tv/dorsalfin1, Hires Flower, Do, Starnova, Zach ZDR, Davi Avila, Mudkip172, Beef Potato, Roberto Desu, and our newest member who just joined today as of me recording this, Big Soup. Thank you, Big Soup, and also the rest of you. Thank you very much for supporting me. We're getting Ino content soon, woo! I guess that's it from me. I hope you learned something. Have a lovely day.